Good morning to everybody. As you know, in London, the ESC has released the new guidelines for chronic coronary syndrome. And it is a very good document, in my opinion, very big, 132 pages. So we decided to ask a few friends to comment on this document. And we have put it together, the best of the guideline, but also what is not so good in this 10 minutes video. So please stay with us, and we will tell the opinion of big experts, such as, for instance, Professor David Quek. What do you think about the algorithm of the likelihood of angina? Is it practical? Is it too complicated?
No, I think the guidelines actually re-emphasize the point that, the history taking and the emphasis on the symptoms of angina is actually very important. It emphasizes, again, on the likelihood versus those which are unlikely to be from angina, as well as include, I think, in a big way, the dyspnea as an anginal equivalent. In that regard, I think the use of these syndromes together is actually quite useful. So I think it is good that the guidelines start off with this kind of an effort.
Excellent. We have a clear improvement here. Let's ask Professor Marzilli about the microvascular angina. He's really an expert. Professor Marzilli, do you agree with the emphasis on microvascular angina in the guidelines?
In a recent paper that we have published, we concluded that microvascular dysfunction is associated with about 13 to 17% of chronic myocardial ischemic syndrome. So it is at least as relevant from an epidemiologic point of view as coronary atherosclerotic obstruction. But I have a warning here. Microvascular dysfunction is a term that includes a wide variety of actual abnormalities in the coronary microcirculation, because they include inappropriate vasodilation or inadequate vasodilation, inappropriate or inadequate vasoconstriction, and these abnormalities may be regional or diffuse to the left ventricular wall and may be permanent or transient. So microvascular dysfunction deserves a lot of attention, but also of caution, because if can be too much of constriction or too much of dilatation, of course, the management must be different.
And what about treating microvascular angina? And particularly, what is your feeling about using trimetazidine for microvascular angina?
The complexity of the mechanisms that are involved in microvascular dysfunction, I think that we must rely on agents that have an anti-ischemic action independently from the precipitating mechanism, that in the greatest majority of cases cannot be exactly identified. So to me, trimetazidine is absolutely the starting point in this area.
Listening this from you, who have a great experience, is very reassuring. The guidelines have also proposed a rather innovative and, I should say, a little bit complicated diagnosis scheme. What do you think, Professor Gowdak? You are an expert about that.
I like to make it simple, starting from the medical history. Remember, the medical history could give you clues of what is the underlying mechanism of ischemia, of angina. It's a predictable threshold, it's effort-induced, the angina happening at rest. So if you have this detailed medical history, first step, it could give you a clue on the diagnosis of what is the underlying mechanism for myocardial ischemia. Then you have to decide which pathway to go. Functional imaging, a lot of interest now, or anatomical. But remember, what are we trying to diagnose? Myocardial ischemia or atherosclerosis? But what I like from these guidelines is from the very early on, Professor Ferrari, they put a message. We have to consider from the very beginning ANOCA and INOCA. And then if you're trying to diagnose Inoka, well, don't be so sad if you don't have the capability in your facility, in your center to do so, because it's a very complicated, expensive. So the first thing is medically treat your patient. And if you may have the opportunity to do the test, it's okay. But if you don't be sad, but consider Inoka and Inoka.
Do you agree with the Professor Marzilli that for, let's say, Inoka or Anoka or microvascular angina, it is a good idea to start with a metabolic agent instead of with the hemodynamic one?
You know, when we are targeting the myocardial ischemia, we're targeting the cell. So we don't care so much what is causing myocardial ischemia, as long as the cell is ischemic. So we now have an opportunity to have an agent like a trametazidine, which will target the cell, regardless of what is causing myocardial ischemia. So, for instance, in my practice, I usually start very early on a combination with the trametazidine, either with the hemodynamic agent or not. So I agree completely. Even if I don't have the documentation of microvascular dysfunction, but I assume clinically trametazidine is the right way to go.
Good. It seems to me that Europe and Brazil are in agreement, and that is always very nice to hear. Thank you, Professor Gowdak.
Thank you.
And for the treatment, we are very happy because I'm asking Professor Rosano what he thinks about treatment as it is shown in the last ESC guidelines. Giuseppe, please tell us.
Thank you, Roberto. I as well believe that there are very good things on the guidelines. And first of all is the recognition that there are no differences between the different anti-anginals. They are all equally effective for the treatment of patients with angina. The other important point is that it's the recognition of the diamond approach that you proposed several years ago, and now is the center for the medical treatment of patients with angina. The guidelines also highlight the importance of fixed dose combinations or combination of drugs in the treatment of angina, and when we go into that, it's important to remind ourselves that the hemodynamic agents do not work in association or have a little effect in association, whilst the most effective combination is of an hemodynamic agent and a metabolic agent. And that is also reflected into the diamond approach that has solid lines between the hemodynamics agents and the metabolic agents. Now, there are a few drawbacks from the guidelines. One is the positioning of ivabradine that is not very clear, why they've limited only to patients with left ventricular function less than 40. This is, in the words of the guideline task force, is to uniform with the American guidelines, but it doesn't make any sense because in America, ivabradine has been approved with for a different indication, and the European Medicines Agency and many other agencies have identified that ivabradine should be given to everyone. The other point is the distinction that they make in between class 1, 2A and 2B. Having said that there's no difference between the different antianginals, we cannot see the reason why using different standards, and probably that is due to the fact that different drugs are available in different countries. And so whilst the beta blockers, nitrates and calcium channel blockers are available worldwide, other treatments like trametazidine or ranolazine, they are not available everywhere. And the other main difference is that whilst ranolazine is present in America, trametazidine is not. So probably the different grade of recommendations regarding the guidelines is also based on the availability, but not on scientific evidence and not on different efficacy.
So it seems to me that there was a lot of progress, although some little criticism. And I have to say that I'm particularly happy that the diamond approach is back, although the spirit of the diamond approach, that all the drugs are the same and we should not categorize them, probably was not fully understood. But Giuseppe, you explain a good reason for that. And with this, I will ask you now to close this 10 minutes video, because you are one of the co-organizers of it with me, and I'd like to ask P2P for allowing us to do the video. So Giuseppe, the conclusion remarks.
Thank you, Roberto. It's I think this in these 10 minutes we've all highlighted what is new in the guidelines. There is a lot of very good things and innovations compared to the previous ones. And we've heard from the group that it's how they should be applied in clinical practice. I believe it will be a good guidance and will be a base for discussion for the future. And we thank you all for being with us in this short video update on the 2024 guidelines for the treatment of chronic coronary syndromes.
I hope you enjoy the expert opinions for the new CCS guidelines from leaders around the world. You may also watch another TMA webinar related to CCS guideline by clicking the web link provided in the description box below. If you have any interesting questions or comments, please post them in the comment box below. The experts will reply and the International Cardiometabolic Channel Secretariat will post their feedback on their behalf. Any adverse events and product quality complaints should be reported to the competent authority or at a Servier web link provided the description box.